I think the most profound post-ascension appearance of Jesus occurred when he manifested or appeared to Francis of Assisi as a seraph, as a six-winged angel. And as a result of this encounter, Francis is known as Jesus's brother and the second Christ. The title was bequeathed upon Francis when he became the first person to receive the stigmata, the 5 wounds of the crucified Christ. And these were transmitted to Francis. Seeing these paintings, this one by Gaudi in the 14th century, of Christ as a resurrected being, as a seraph, manifesting to Francis of Assisi and beaming to him the 5 wounds of the stigmata. And after this experience, Francis begins to go through the process of ascension. Now, I've been in numerous churches throughout Italy, numerous museums, literally around the world, collecting these images of Francis and Christ as a seraph. I'm just absolutely mesmerized by them. And thinking of the possibility here that once again, as in the example of St. Teresa of Avila and the other art that we looked at, that perhaps these paintings are more than just recollections of this experience. Perhaps these are actual ways that you and I can begin to place ourselves in the position of Francis of Assisi, and through contemplation, meditation, reflection on the love of the Creator, which is what Francis and the Franciscans taught, we too could manifest a vision of Christ before us as a seraph. Francis wasn't the only person to see Christ as a seraph. And this is a bit of research that I'm very, very proud of, because I just happened upon it one day. I was in the Nubian Museum in Aswan, Egypt. And I look in a case, and here's this depiction of what I call Big Bird Jesus. It's Jesus as a seraph. And the Egyptologists debate whether or not this image is from the 4th century or the 10th century. But they're very certain that it was made by an Egyptian Christian in Egypt, which means that somebody either 200 years or 800 years, actually 300 years or 800 years before Francis saw Jesus as a seraph, somebody in Egypt, this artist, also believed they had an encounter with Jesus as a seraphim angel. That's really extraordinary, because we normally don't think of Christ as an angel. But this is what this tradition is saying, is that he in fact is part of the seraphim, the highest order of angels, transformed humans who have achieved the highest possible state of human evolution and transformed themselves into beings of pure light and pure love, and joined these angelic beings that dwell at the throne of God. These seraphim angels are portrayed as red-winged because we're told they burn with the love of the Creator. And according to Renaissance magi, the way that we can become a seraph is by meditating on the love of the Creator. Something that I have shown in my work is that when you see Christ enthroned with the rainbow around him, holding the resurrection stick and the crown, he can match him up very well with Padmasambhava on his throne, his rainbow throne, holding the resurrection stick, the crown of glory, and the Vajra, or the symbol of compassion and action. I believe these images are interchangeable. But that isn't the only way that Christ is portrayed. He's also portrayed in his resurrected form as a seraph. And Francis began his encounter with Christ as a seraph when he saw this painting come alive. And then later, Christ manifests as a rainbow angel to him. And I believe that the seraphim and the rainbow body beings are exactly the same beings. And that when Francis had this encounter with Christ as a seraphim, it kickstarted within him his process of ascension. And it told Francis that he too had the capability of transforming into an angelic being. The key here is that while pouring out his love for Christ, Francis beheld the crucified Christ as a seraph. The scholars refer to this as a moment of seraphic ecstasy. So Francis is not in an ordinary state of mind as he's having this experience. And once again, I wonder if there was some substance, be it a hallucinogen or maybe triggered by meditation, a substance that came from within his own consciousness, within his brain, secreted from the pineal gland probably, that put him in this ecstatic state of consciousness where he could perceive this otherworldly being, Christ, as an angel. But the point is that Francis is in seraphic ecstasy. And it's in this ecstatic state that he then not only perceives Christ as a seraphim angel, but also receives the wounds of stigmata and 5 rays of light that burn into his flesh. Francis's biographer, Bonaventure of Bagnoregio, writing in the Major Legend of St. Francis, said that through the stigmata, the true love of Christ transformed the lover into his image. So through the rays coming off this seraphim angel, Christ, the true love of Christ transformed Francis into his image. Now here's where we're getting into this kind of mirror world that this line of thinking enters you into, because our soul is a reflection of God, right? And so Francis is going to this deep state of love, so deep that he's reflecting back to Christ that love. And the image of Christ is then transforming Francis into the purest love possible. It's pretty deep. When the vision disappeared, writes Bonaventure, Francis was left with a marvelous ardor in his heart. So his heart is transformed by this experience. And at the same time, there were imprinted on his body markings that were no less marvelous, says Bonaventure. These markings were the stigmata, and after receiving the stigmata, Francis became known as the second Christ. So these scenes of Francis with the open book, with the skull, the same skull as Mary Magdalene is seen with, receiving the wounds of the stigmata, are really insightful for us because they talk about us going into this deep state of ecstatic wonderment through just the meditation on the love of the Creator. And it opens us up into this, it's like opening a portal into another worldly realm where we can perceive Christ as a seraph who then can transmit to us through beams of light into our body the divine light that will begin to transmute our body into light to match the frequency of the resurrected Christ. This is what I see going on in these images based on my understanding of Francis's experience here. And so this is why, as I say again, I've gone to such lengths to try to collect as many of these images as possible. This is San Marco in, Santa Croce in Florence, in Gotti's painting here of Christ on the Tree of Life. And it's on this same wall where we see Francis receiving the stigmata. I can't get enough of these images. I hope you enjoy them as well. I realize for a lot of people seeing these for the first time, as many are when they see my presentations, that it's kind of off-putting to see Christ as a seraph angel. But this could well be the way that the Christ phases back and forth as a resurrected being, and can in fact manifest in our consciousness as well to translate or transmit the vibration of the light body into our hands, so that then we too can ascend as well. So this is a really important ascension story that we're walking through here. And again, we're looking at the possibility that Francis is the reincarnation of John the Baptist. So he would have been training as an Essene for this moment. And in future presentations, I'll be going into much more detail about my recent research, actually ongoing research for the past few years, but it's kind of all coming together in my book that will be out this fall, about how the Essenes, led by their initiator, John the Baptist, were actually recovering these ancient light body teachings, and were actually interacting with angels. And the angels that they would have been interacting with are the seraphim. That according to the Essenes themselves. And so it's perfectly natural then for Jesus as an Essene to receive their light body teachings, go completely through it in this process of ascension and resurrection, and then show up 1,200 years later in Earth time to his initiator, John the Baptist, who's shown here in the middle panel of this triptych, and kind of return the favor, if you will. And perhaps, again, this light body form is how these resurrected beings travel. So we can just imagine that the Essenes during Jesus and Mary Magdalene's time, who were interacting with these angels, would have perceived something quite similar to what we're seeing Francis see here. They would have gone into these ecstatic states like Mary Magdalene did. And those cute little cherubs that were taking Mary Magdalene into the heavens on her clouds during her ascension were also these seraphim. That's my conclusion. And it's supported, again, not just by the story of Francis, but also my deep research into the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Essenes, who were describing their encounters with these beings and their transformation into beings of light. Like Francis, the Essenes were obsessed with purity. They were oppressed, they were oppressed, that's for sure. They were exterminated by Rome, but they were also obsessed not only with purity, but also with compassion and being beings of pure light and pure love that would elevate them to the level of the seraphim. So most Franciscans know the story of Francis, and when Pope, the newly elected Pope a couple years ago, took the name Francis, I was really thinking, okay, we're going to start to see a revival in the images of Christ as a seraph, because that is the key experience of Francis of Assisi, but today it hasn't happened. So that's what we're doing here, though, is going back and looking at this important story of Francis raising his level of vibration, connecting with Christ through this painting, and then receiving this initiation from Christ as a seraph. I love this depiction here by Bartholomew Carducci. Francis is lifted off the ground in a shaft or pillar of light emanating from an opening in the heavens in which Christ as a fiery seraphim hovers. This gives new definition to the term "beam me up, Scotty," right? Remember what we saw a moment ago in the Ascension of Mary Magdalene, the ecstasy of Mary Magdalene. She goes into ecstasy. She too sees the shaft of light. And I equated that shaft of light with the same rays coming from the Aton in the ancient Egyptian images of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I think that what Francis is perceiving is not an earthly light. He's perceiving an otherworldly light by going into this ecstatic trance. And this enables him to open a portal or gate in heaven through which Christ can then manifest. This is an extraordinary engraving from 1628. It's from Spain, and we see the story of Christ and Francis merge into one. The two halves of their lives unite in the hybrid being, the seraph, in the center of the image. Now, one needs to analyze their own heart and what happens to their heart when they truly love something or someone to comprehend the statement that is also represented here, that the true love of Christ transformed the lover into his image. So what this is saying is that Christ's true image is a seraph. And I'm not going to go into detail here, but you can get my Rainbow Body webinar from Portal to Ascension, or you can go to my website and order my flash drive that also has that webinar on it, along with my 18 books and several other video presentations where I make the solid connection between the rainbow body of Padmasambhava and the light body of the seraph to say that they're the same thing. But what I'm going to here is that Francis is said to be not just the second coming of Christ or John the Baptist, but the first coming of the next human. Be a hybrid being. Some people believe that we will mesh our flesh with technology and that we will create a new hybrid being. But I believe that the next hybrid being is a human angel being, modeled after Francis of Assisi's experience with Christ as a seraph. And so here is this kind of bizarre looking Spanish image of Francis as a hybrid angel human. It's wild, wild, wild. So could it be possible that Francis really is John the Baptist reincarnated and now receives the initiation from Christ? I just want to show you this right quick. This is images that show Francis receiving his cloak of light in the desert, and then receiving, as Francis of Assisi, receiving the stigmata wounds from Christ as a seraph. Often these paintings are side by side. And the reason why is because it shows that these are the same person. It's like a cartoon. Here's our past life, here's our present life. And in the future life, we're to imagine that Francis is now a seraph himself and maybe seeking out individuals such as us who are raising our vibration, our understanding of these teachings, so that we too can receive the final seal, which is what we're told Francis received from Christ as a seraph. He received the final seal. And that final seal is actually our light body. And so by raising ourselves to this level of understanding, we're placing ourselves on the path of understanding. I'm going to skip through a couple of these slides here because I want to get back to these here. Because Francis and Claire, as we'll discuss here, are now two more models of this pathway to ascension. And it's very clear that part of this process of ascension involves ecstasy, not the party drug, but accessing a level of mind of trance where our soul can leave the body and can interact with these higher dimensional realms. And part of this, as I discussed earlier, I think is our realization that our soul is a jewel on Indra's net. And that reflected in that our soul reflects all the souls of the universe. So therefore, our soul can do what Francis's soul did, what Mary Nefertiti, all these other figures we've been discussing today. So look at this painting here by Bellini of Francis in ecstasy. He locks on to the opening in the heavens in the upper left. And this is kind of what drives my work too, is to help initiates, researchers, questers such as yourself to say, hey, it's okay to pierce the veil. It's okay to go beyond the 3D world, because all the good stuff happens beyond the 3D world, right? And over and again, from Akhenaten and Nefertiti, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Padmasambhava, Yeshishogyo, now Francis, they're trying to get us to go inward, to open something, pathways in our consciousness that enable us to see the openings in the heavens. So I put a yellow beam here to show the direction of his attention. And now in the detail here, we see Francis, he's got that book and skull, as he often does in these paintings, because that's the same skull that we see possessed by Mary Magdalene as well. And his attention is drawn into the open heavens up in the left-hand corner, which is what we're going to see. Bellini captures Francis in the state of being beside oneself or wrapped out of oneself. This is rapture, okay? A state in which the mind is elevated above the reach of ordinary impressions is when, under the influence of overpowering emotion, in this case, love, Francis apparently was able to activate his heart chakra to such an extent that he manifested this image of Christ as a seraph. Or through the influence of extraordinary elevation of the spirit, as when the soul, unconscious of sensible objects, is supposed to contemplate heavenly mysteries as indicated by the opening in heaven above. So Francis becomes a real role model for our connection with all that is, and our ability to connect with these other dimensional realms by opening up the heart. Well, let's compare him with Mary Magdalene in ecstasy. This is, again, the ascension of Mary Magdalene. She, I think, maybe is imbibed a liquid, a substance, an oil from the alabaster jar, and now she's in this ecstatic state. It doesn't mean she's hallucinating. It just means she's gone into a deep state of reverie, and could even be a deep state of love, where now she can perceive this shaft of light coming down from the upper right of the painting. It's always there, just awaiting our opening of our consciousness. Again, in Francis's model of opening up the heart and going into this deep state of love, or perhaps through the use of substances, and oil perhaps. Caravaggio's Magdalene in Ecstasy. They're extraordinary images, and they're fun to contemplate, because you just ask yourself, what does it feel like to be in that kind of ecstasy, that kind of state, sort of deep love and emotion. Ecstasy, and here is Francis again, is described as an intensely emotional state in which rational thought and self-control are absent. What can prompt you to go into that deep state of emotion, of reverie? What do we need to do to open the heart, to unlock our consciousness in this way? There's individual tips and techniques that all of us need to kind of raise our comfort level to. But what this is encouraging us to do is to find that pathway. And here we see the opening of heaven and these lines of light by Francis here. There's an angel here to support him. With one eye open, the saint seems to see something that's hidden from us. And what he's seeing is that the hidden light, the light beyond light. And that hidden light, Akhenaten called the Atan. It's the light that illuminates the sun and can only be seen with our inner vision. And so Francis is leading the way for us to go inward and to connect, open these pathways. And again, my practice, one of my practices anyway, my primary practice is the visual pathways, this artwork, to link with what Francis is seeing, feeling, experiencing, knowing that as his neocortex is firing in the painting, so is mine. My consciousness is trying to experience exactly the same thing. And what I need to do is to figure out how to take the brakes off, so to speak, so that my consciousness can experience exactly what Francis is doing. And I know neurologically or neuroscientifically speaking that the barrier that keeps me from experiencing exactly what Francis is experiencing here is my skin barrier. And there are neurons in the neocortex that says that experience is not happening to you, but it can. And what I need to do is to find a way to open up those pathways so that I can experience that too. As I said earlier, Francis is gazing at an inner sky here. He's in ecstasy, which is, as I said, a late 14th century word meaning in a frenzy, stupor, or excited. It relates to entrancement. And I hope that what I've been doing these past few hours, is entrancing you with these images. And that they could be perhaps an entrance for you to enter into these paintings as altars that alter your consciousness and to help get you excited about taking this next step and following the pathways of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Jesus, Magdalene, Padmasambhava, Yeshishogyo, Francis, and also, as we'll see here, Claire as well. And to recognize that all of these way showers are talking about the same thing, and access to our soul as a reflection of the love of God. And that's all we really have to do to get to the next step, I think, is to realize the power of our soul. And then after that, that's what starts to open us up to the experiences, to the people, to the books, the places, the works of art that we need to take ourselves to that next level. And so what a wonderful way for this to occur. Art as a way to take the dust off our soul, to help us to polish our diamond and say, yeah, I'm excited about this. I want to follow this path. I want to have this experience of Christ as an illuminated being manifest before me. That's what it's all about. And so we'll follow the path of Francis and maybe go to Assisi. Claire and I are planning future trips to Assisi in 2017. We love taking people to this sacred place and tapping into the story of Francis of Assisi and Claire of Assisi, walking in these footsteps and gazing into the heavens from the same places where they meditated. We take you to the actual hermitage of Francis of Assisi, where he had his experience with Christ as a seraph, where Francis and Claire meditated. Here's a favorite statue of Francis in the Stargate, and me back in 2010 following him along that path through the Stargate. Really wonderful experience. So let's bring in the Claire piece just for a moment before we close out here. She too, like Francis, was raised in a wealthy family. And after hearing Francis preach the first time, she escaped an arranged marriage and devoted herself to contemplative life in imitation of Jesus. And when she was just 18, she left her home and joined Francis and his friars and joined the Franciscan movement. This is Claire of Assisi received by Francis in this painting by Belluneri. And it's a wonderful testament to the energetic exchange that we're talking about here between these two. They're the archetypal divine masculine and divine feminine, although they weren't married like Francis, but rather like Akhenaten and Nefertiti, like Jesus and Mary Magdalene. They in every way did exemplify the divine couple, the immortal couple, because without Claire, Francis would not be able to fulfill the mission that was bequeathed on him when he received the stigmata from Christ as a seraph. Saint Claire, here shown by Simone Martini, founded the Order of the Poor Ladies, a monastic religious order for women in the Franciscan tradition, and wrote their Rule of Life. Following her death, she was given the sainthood, and the Order of Saint Claire was founded. They're also called the Poor Clares. And there are wonderful writings attributed to Claire of Assisi that you can still get today, and I highly recommend that people that want to tap into this aspect of the Claire and Francis story to get a hold of her writings and follow her path of actually renunciation of leaving behind all this material and focus on, like Michelangelo with the block of marble, removing all of the material aspects of life and getting into the core of the soul. This is what their story is ultimately all about, is recognizing that our soul growth is what really matters. It's why we incarnated in our physical form. Not to dwell on the material, as fun as that can be, but rather to get into the immaterial world, to get into our trance states, to follow the path of ecstasy and open our consciousness into the openings in the holes in space that are all around us right now. So we're looking at the Basilica of St. Clare in Assisi, really special place when we visit there, and various depictions here from in that basilica. One of my favorites is this one here. It's actually from the Franciscan Monastery of the Holy Land in Washington, D.C. And we see Francis and Clare on either side of the enthroned Christ, and he appears to be in some kind of a radiant gateway or portal, stargate, coming through the sun, manifesting before them. This is one I can't wait to visit. It's in New York City. I haven't seen it in person, but it's a mind-blowing image that ties together several of our themes here of Francis and Clare on either side of an open portal or gateway with Christ emerging from the cloud. Just a magnificent image of Stargate metaphysics, which ultimately is what all of this is about, is our transformation of our consciousness so that we can link with these avatars, gurus, angels, and ultimately follow them into the heavenly realms. At the Church of St. Francis of San Francisco in Assisi, we see Francis ascending on a cloud of light as the second Christ. So within that church is encoded all of this ascension mythology that goes all the way back actually to the Essenes. Because when angels are taking a soul in an orb of light such as this is actually the Merkaba, the throne chariot that the Essenes spoke of, that was developed from within our own consciousness. And so here's Francis ascending into the heavenly realms on his Merkaba cloud, showing us that he has gone through this whole process of connecting with Christ as a seraph and then ultimately ascending himself. This next image is really provocative and very profound to me. It's from San Damiano in Assisi, Italy, and it shows the crucifixion of Christ with Francis present at the crucifixion, receiving a ray of light, a beam of light from the mouth of Christ into his mouth. I'll kind of leave this one up to you to interpret any way you want, but to me, it suggests that Francis received the impulse of light of the resurrected Christ through this painting. And once again, it's another one of these open eye meditations where we can place ourselves in the place of Francis and receive this light of illumination on the shaft of light. We have to know or assume that Francis is in a state of ecstasy and that he is seeing this otherworldly light. When most people look at an image of the crucifixion, they're seeing the suffering of Christ, not Francis. Francis is connecting with the love of Christ. And as a consequence, when you follow the path of love, not the path of Roma, of suffering, you will see Christ as an illuminated light being who can transmit the light or vibration of our light being self, even through a painting. And that's what I see going on here in this remarkable image. Perhaps the most mind-blowing image to me of Francis and in Assisi are these images where he's enthroned like Christ on a cloud and surrounded by the red-winged seraphim. I mean, this again tells me that Francis of Assisi has completed his ascension and that he is now an ascended being, and like the seraphim is capable of phasing back and forth between the material world and the immaterial world. And he is enthroned as Christ. And as the Bible describes, the throne of Christ is surrounded by the seraphim, and there they are on either side of the throne of Francis in the celestial realms. This is extraordinary mythology. It's extraordinary history, because we're talking about a human being who existed in the 13th century that did what all of us would dearly love to be able to do, to connect with the resurrected Christ and transform. Now, here's my unique piece again in this whole puzzle. When I'm looking at Francis enthroned, holding the resurrection stick in his hand and sitting on the cloud, I'm saying that is exactly the same as Padmasambhava on his lotus throne with his resurrection stick. I believe that Francis, as an enthroned being, has attained the same level of light body as what Padmasambhava has attained with the rainbow body of light. There is no Franciscan teacher that says this. There's no Tibetan teacher that says this. This is just my supposition here. This is what I'm taking from this imagery, and knowing that the seraphim and the rainbow body beings are the same, and that Francis has become a light being. He must have attained the great perfection. This is also Francis in glory, also at San Francisco and Assisi. Whereas we come in here, we see that he's surrounded by angels and heavenly beings. He's a radiant light being, holding the book, holding the resurrection stick. And once again, I'm suggesting that he is not only the second Christ, as he's portrayed here, but he is also portrayed as a resurrected light being, just like Padmasambhava.